Welcome to the Beltway Broadcast, the premier podcast for the workplace learning and talent development professionals of the Association for Talent Development's Metro DC chapter. We've got some great resources in store for you today.
Hello, fellow ATDers. My name is Stephanie Hubka, and I am the 2023 Vice President of Membership and Outreach and a member of the Pod Squad here at the Metro DC chapter of ATD. For today's episode, we have Halyna Hodges, our Vice President of Finance and Operations, as our producer, but we are missing my co-host, Christina Eanes, our 2023 Vice President of Marketing and Communications. But for this episode, we are thrilled to be welcoming Karl Kapp. So welcome, Karl.
Thanks, Stephanie. I'm thrilled to be here. So thanks for having me. This is great. And hello to everybody in the DC metro area, right? Yeah.
And, honestly, around the world, we've got listeners from, I think, just about every state around the world these days.
Oh,
so
fantastic.
Quite the group of people who will be joining us for our conversation today. And I am so excited to get into this topic. Before we jump in, I would love it if you could tell our listeners and our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So my name is Karl Kapp. I'm a professor of instructional technology and design at it used to be called Bloomsburg University. We've merged with two of our sister universities, so it's now Commonwealth University. They spent a long time thinking of that name. We're Commonwealth University. I haven't moved. Everything's the same. And I've spent most of my career thinking about games and, turns out, gamification and interactive learning. So written many books on the topic. I've done LinkedIn learning courses on the topic. My favorite right now is I have a little side project called the Unofficial Unauthorized History of Learning Games, where I'm looking at learning games and thinking about what we can learn from them as developers. So I've done a lot of work. My day job, I tell people, is as a faculty member at Bloomsburg University teaching instructional design. But my kind of passion is all around how do you make learning more engaging, more interesting, and frankly, more fun.
Yeah, it is so good that is the conversation that we're going to be having today. I feel like I hear from a lot of people that learning should just be fun. I completely agree. We're going to talk about why that is, and especially how gamification plays into that. But before we really get into some of the fun stuff, it might be a good idea for us to kind of start at the beginning. So before we hopped on to talk today, I actually mentioned to a colleague of mine that I was going to be having a conversation about gamification. And she said, "Oh, great, about just, building games into learning." And I said, "Well, there's actually perhaps a couple of different aspects or definitions when it comes to what gamification is." Could you start us there? Tell us a little bit about what gamification means.
Yeah, that's great. So that's a great way to start the topic.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that's interesting is so gamification is not necessarily, and I hate to be like the bubble burster, but not necessarily about fun. So gamification is using elements of games in non-game situations. So typically what I always give an example of, you can give an example of a progress bar, right? So games have progress bars. And learning has progress bars, different things have progress bars. So that's a good way to think about gamification. LinkedIn, for example, increased completion of profiles by as much as 25% when they introduced a progress bar. And that wasn't necessarily fun or engaging. It was just, hey, here's an item from games. So it's basically a group of items that we use in games that we can use in non-game situations. Usually fun is kind of one of the byproducts, but not necessarily. So timing, for example, I always say, when you have a young child and you say, hey, we live kind of in a suburban area. Hey, I'll see how fast it takes you to go get the mail and bring it back here, right? So that's, for them, maybe it's fun. That's a form of gamification.
Yeah.
The other thing is sometimes it's a continuum. So the first question I always ask when somebody says, hey, I want to gamify my instruction, I'm like, well, what do you mean by gamification? Because there's a lot of different, definitions. And so sometimes I look at it as a continuum from no games at all, no game activities or anything, all the way up to a full-fledged kind of simulation. But the reality is it's we think a lot about points, badges, and leaderboards. Some people call those the evil trifecta of gamification. they're smattered around
understand.
and they're
I
not used
understand.
very well, but
Right.
they do have value. So I saw the other day somebody said, "Oh yeah, points badges and leaderboards are they're evil, but leaderboards are great." I'm like, well, you need points to get a leaderboard, right? Don't you have? So they all kind of work together. But I'm starting to and have for a while thought about what I call like deeper gamification or robust gamification, which is the elements of using story, positive feedback loops, things like progression, things like collection, things like collaboration. So those elements that really draw people in and help them focus on the learning outcomes that we need them to get as developers of instruction.
Yeah, and actually, that's a really good segue to another thought that crossed my mind as you were sharing some of this. So it's good to have that base level understanding about what gamification is. I think there is a lot of confusion sometimes about what it really looks like. And I know it's a word that we've been using for a while. In fact, I have another question I'll ask in a little bit that kind of connects to an experience that I had with gamification a while back.
Okay.
You'd mentioned a little bit about, kind of some of the reasons that gamification can work. I'd love to hear you tell us a little bit about some of the benefits that you've experienced or seen organizations experience by incorporating elements of gamification.
Yeah, so there's a number of different examples of how gamification has really helped organizations. So
Yeah.
one organization that I've worked with is on the call center side. And so
Mm-hmm.
they were trying to help the call center employees learn more about what they needed to do.
Yeah.
So they actually created little job aids and help. But every time you would look at the job aid and then you would apply that knowledge, because call centers they measure, listen, everything.
Oh, of course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
definitely Big Brother. So anyway, so they knew what was going, and they knew when you applied them. So when
Yeah.
people started seeing those leaderboards actually, and hey, this person's applying it, and this person's applying it, the performance, the KPIs improved dramatically because people were able to cut call time. They were able to answer questions more efficiently. They were able
Mm-hmm.
to know the answer. So that was kind of a really interesting example. Another example is an organization, retail organizations, a big issue now is shrinkage, right? Shrinkage
Oh,
is when,
right.
right, inventory disappears
Mm-hmm.
and is not paid for. So
Yeah.
it could either be theft, it could either be an employee overlooking or counting or whatever. So they
Sure.
had this little thing where they would do a little tiny game that you would play. And in
Yeah.
the middle of that game, they ask a question about inventory shrinkage. And you
Ooh.
can play any game you want. You can have the question. And once you answer that question, then you would have a little bit more game time, and that would be it. And they just did it once a day, right? So they used the game
Sure.
as incentive. And they found 20% reduction in inventory shrinkage using that particular technique, which I thought that was kind of amazing.
Wow.
Another example is this organization, sales organization. So their sales reps, they get the instruction on the product and everything. And then usually it's this big sales meeting. And then you go out and you sell. And I don't remember what they said about that or what was that. So they
Yeah.
did a gamified follow-up of question answer kind of thing. And you earn points and you can, again, be on the leaderboard and things like that.
Yeah.
And they dramatically improve sales as well. So by reminding the sales reps of the key features, benefits of the product, reminding them of the sales proposition, what the competitors were doing on a regular
Yeah.
basis, that was a lot of help. And then just kind of on a personal note,
Yeah.
my wife is a microbiologist by training. So when
Mm-hmm.
I always tell her I'm doing research, she like giggles uncontrollably. Like, that's not really
Oh.
research. You're just asking people questions. Well,
Understood.
yeah, but it's kind of research. But so anyway, I was messing around with this gamification platform, and my wife's like, let me see that. Let me see what you're doing. I'm like, no, because I don't need you to
Stay
make any
away.
more fun of me than you're already making in terms of, and she's like, no, let me do it. So she got onto the platform Like she spent like an hour and a half, like totally engaged with the content because of the
Really?
gamified elements of it. So there was the element of the progress bar. There was a little bit of story. There was a way for her to earn points. There were consequences for incorrect answers. She was totally
Mm.
like engaged in it. So from that personal level to the larger levels of the call center and things like that, gamification, I've seen it work on many different levels. I even use it in my graduate program. I form students into teams, and I give them a mock request for proposal, and they have to compete against the proposal and or compete against the other teams. And it's amazing. I've done
Wow.
it without the competition, and it's just a different class. The competition just raises the level of performance. Now, there are other complications with games. They're not with gamification. It's not a panacea, right? So you have
Sure.
more the students become a little bit secretive because they don't want to share anything. Sometimes it becomes hyper competitive. I have to put an end to that. So
Oh, sure.
it's not that it's the panacea, but but to me, ultimately, the level of performance, because they want to be the best of that group, just raises what they're able to do. So it's kind of exciting to see that happen. And I guess one more example, I
Yeah.
present at conferences a lot, and I
Mm.
have a game where I use audience interactive system, audience response system. And I've done it where I've said, okay, here's some questions, and you
Yep.
people answer these questions and see if you're right. And people answer them, and it's nice. The moment I divide them into teams and I say, okay, it's team 1 against team 2, it's night and day. People are
Completely.
more focused. There's more energy in the room. And the interesting thing, like, it's totally meaningless. Like, they're arbitrary teams. Nothing will happen at the end of this presentation in terms of I'm not giving you anything. You just have bragging rights. And it's just
Absolutely.
amazing the level of excitement. And I also, the last thing, um, I teach 3-hour classes, so I could go on forever. So,
I
but
love this.
so the last thing is, it's not all about competition. So I don't want anybody to get the plenty of gamified experiences revolve around collaboration. And I've
Yeah.
seen collaboration be some of the most um, meaningful uses of gamification. So don't think it just has to be competition. It can be competition against a situation, right? Solve this
Mhm.
problem, figure out this mystery. Those kinds of things as a group work really well in a gamified environment.
I love using games in that kind of an environment as well. I actually did a training not too long ago that incorporated a couple of elements of things like collaboration, but also negotiation. Each team had an objective where if they succeeded, the other team did not. And it's one of those situations where you're not, there's no prize at the end, bragging rights only. But introducing that element changed the dynamic of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually designed it in exactly that way. The thought was really, we're going to start with kind of a more, focused exploration of a topic, and then we're going to gamify it a little bit. Their understanding went from perhaps moderate engagement, I suppose. It's okay, I hear what you're saying, I kind of care, to I am so tuned in
Mm-hmm.
to what this means and how I use this. And you're right, it was a night and day kind of moment. Very surprising in a lot of ways, but
Yeah.
then again, maybe not. Maybe,
Right.
it's because a lot of us really do like to tune into that sort of, a gamified experience.
Yeah. I mean, it's human nature to want to know where you are in
Right.
comparison to others, to the knowledge. And then it's very human nature to want to be above average. So
Absolutely.
those traits kind of drive us, and
Yeah.
are very positive. I mean, it's gotten us to the moon. It's gotten us, to
Yeah.
explore new things. It's created AI. So to think that, oh, that's not good, or that's not a learning situation, is not the right way to think about it, because it does drive learning.
Right. It's for people who are officially bought in. I would bet at this point in time, everybody is leaning into their phone or their computer, wherever they're joining us today, and thinking, now, what do I do next? In terms of maybe a gamification strategy. Are there spots where you recommend that teams or organizations begin if perhaps gamification is not part of their current trajectory for training? Is there a certain level of buy-in that you recommend people secure, or ways to maybe sell the concept to a leadership who's not quite so sure? And are there really, kind of initial steps as far as getting yourself ready to incorporate gamification into existing training?
Yeah, so there's there's a lot to cover. That's
I'm sure there is.
Right. So, but the first thing I'll say to people is play games, and lots of games and different kinds of games, because people say, oh, gamification, it's about points or whatever. But that's not what motivates anybody to play a game. Nobody plays a game just to get a point, right? They play for the challenge. They play to overcome obstacles. So start playing games to get a sense of what games are all about. The second thing I would say in an organization is, if you're going to gamify something, you have to gamify business processes that have meaningful outcomes and gamify the behavior. So, for example, what a lot of people want to do, like in a sales situation, is say, we're going to reward the person, gamify whoever sells the most. Well, I got news for you. The person who sells the most is already rewarded, right? Because they're getting a high commission.
Makes sense.
The people that don't know how to do that are struggling to figure out how to do that. So what you should really gamify is the behaviors that lead to the outcomes. So instead of gamifying the most sales, take a look at what the best salesperson does. Oh, perhaps she makes a lot of calls. All right, gamify making a lot of calls, because that behavior then will eventually lead to sales and actually teach people what they need to do. So one of the early things that I recommend, besides playing games, is to break down the, you have this desired corporate outcomes, KPI, whatever it is, break it down into behaviors and figure out, can any of those behaviors be gamified? And then the other thing that you want to look at is, if you're going to gamify behavior, you have to gamify it aligned with the game mechanics.
Yes.
So what happens is, a lot of people say, oh, well, we'll make this timed. Well, is time actually the critical factor for this behavior? So, for example, if you're in a call center, getting off the phone, yes. If you're a salesperson, you want to be on the phone as long as possible with this client to, help persuade them that your product is right for them. So if you say, oh, we're gonna gamify, sales phone calls, and you only have a minute to complete, whatever, that's not congruent with what you want the person to achieve. So we've got to make sure that we gamify the right behaviors, and then when we gamify those behaviors, we make sure that what we're doing is aligning the behavior so it's congruent with the on-the-job behavior. So maybe accuracy is more important, maybe personalization is more important. So those are what you reward with, the gamification elements, rather than just saying, okay, it's got to be a minute. And so the mistake I see a lot of people making is not really diving deeply into all the elements and all the behaviors. So it's easy to say, we'll buy this package from the vendor and we'll gamify whatever. It's harder to say, okay, we need to do an analysis to figure out what the behaviors are, to figure out what the supporting behaviors are, and then align those with game mechanics. But if you do that, that's when you have success.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I think it's very easy to forget that there should be a strategic element to gamification. It's not gamification for entertainment or just to make it fun. I'd mentioned I had a story about gamification. About 10 years ago, I was interviewing for a new position. And during the interview, I was asked, what are current trends or future trends in talent development? Gamification was something that I mentioned. And I remember it was almost as if they'd rehearsed it. Everybody at the table just put their hands on the table and leaned in. Tell us everything about this. Gamification. What is this? So I told them what I knew. I'm certainly not the expert in the field, but I was happy to tell them what I understood of it. Well, I ended up getting the offer. I accepted it on my first day. The first question they said is, when do we gamify? When do we? Well, you don't want to just do it for fun, right? do you want it to? What are our learning outcomes and what behaviors are we changing? And it was funny because they had not made the connection. And it was later on, we did eventually find ways that we could gamify some of the training that we had. But it was funny that was the first thing. Well, it's trendy. It's new. We got to do it now. No, we got to strategize. We got to figure out the whys and the hows before we just do something.
Exactly.
So it could be,
And
I think it could be easy to forget it.
yes, very easy to forget. That's a great story. The other thing I would say, that's such a good advice that you just gave, and expand it to everything, right? So
Yeah.
AI is the whole like, hey, when are we doing AI? Well, what do you want to do with
Right.
it? I don't know, but we've got to do AI. Well, okay, well, let's think about this for a minute. So
Yeah.
I think that's really good advice.
Yeah. And in fact, that might be kind of the last place where we should go as far as our conversation for today. We've talked a lot about gamification. I love the background and the use cases. I mean, these examples have been so colorful. It's so easy to understand how they might relate for all of us. What does the future look like?
Yeah.
What are we talking about as far as next steps or what to expect, or maybe what we should prepare for if gamification is already something on the table in our companies?
So that's a great. So here's what I think. So I think of gamification as there are several types of gamification. One is what we call structural gamification. That's the points,
Yeah.
badges, leaderboards. The other is
Yeah.
content gamification, where you make
Yeah.
the content itself more game-like. And if
Yep.
we look around at the entertainment world and all of the competition for our attention, they're
Yeah.
using storytelling, they're using engagement loops, they're using cliffhangers, they're using all those kind of elements. And
All
so
of it.
I think gamification needs to move in that direction in terms of being more immersive. And I don't mean immersive like the technology, but I mean the design of the instruction and even the
Yeah.
design of our learning apps. One of the interesting things I think about it, if you think about the iPhone, no one teaches you now that you know the basics of the iPhone, like how to use an app or whatever. You just kind of figure it out, or it walks you through it.
Right.
It's very intuitive, and so our training needs to become a gamified design sense, not necessarily gamification. So when people say, "Oh, well, let's make it like cute characters or colors or whatever," I've worked with engineers, and that's not a gamification approach that works for them.
No.
But what engineers like to do is solve problems. So let's
Yes.
make the instruction around solving problems. So gamification really needs to mature. And I've actually been thinking about a book called Beyond Gamification. But the idea is to use deeper, richer, more focused behavioral engagement techniques to guide people. Now, not engagement for engagement's sake, but engagement for the learning. We know we can't get any learning without engagement. So we don't want to just, like you said, I would say, if you want somebody really to have fun, give them the day off, right? If you want to learn something, let's be intelligent about gamification. So that's kind of where I see the future, being more intelligent about gamification.
I think that is such a great way to summarize what could be coming for us. And I also want to say that I hope that was a book announcement, because I would be the first one to sign up to buy that. I mean, you hit on everything that excites me about learning in general, but gamification very specifically. I am just so excited about where we're going to be headed with this.
It's very exciting. Well, actually, so the book title actually morphed. So I am writing a book for ATD actually called it's around what I'm calling action first learning.
Yes.
So the idea is, let's get the learner to do something right away instead of telling them the objectives and all that stuff. So the book covers AI, it covers VR, but VR. It covers escape rooms. It covers interactive presentations. So lots of examples and case studies, and so it'll be out in 2025. Provided I write it by 2024. So
that's the hard part.
I might be doing less interviews and more writing.
Well,
I'm really excited about the book, and really excited about I think the turn of we've kind of gamification is no longer a toddler, right? It's kind of toward the teenage years, and this book kind of hopefully moves that conversation a level or two up.
I think it certainly takes the content to where we need it to be, because I think it's going to meet us where we're really expecting our learners are right now and where they're going to want to be met. So what a great idea. Oh my gosh, this has been a fun conversation.
It has been fun.
I am sorry that this part of it is wrapping up. I am happy, though, that we're not quite done asking questions of you yet. We wrap up each one of our episodes with what we call rapid fire questions. 3 questions, usually no more than about 60 seconds or so to answer. So what do you think? Do you have time for just 3 more rapid fire
Yeah,
style
no, that sounds
questions.
great. That sounds like fun. Bring them on.
Often the hardest ones we ask, but
Okay.
let's see how it goes, right? So,
Right.
first question for you today. Give us one book that everyone must read and why.
Okay, so I'm sitting in my office, so I happen to
Mm-hmm.
have books close by. So one of them, I'm gonna exceed. So this is called Challenges for Game Designers. So that's a great book for learning game design in general. It's not about learning and development. And then one more, I have a book that I wrote with Sharon Bowler called Play to Learn. And so if you're thinking about learning in games, those are 2 good books to take a look at and to explore. And the Play to Learn actually is available from ATD. So you can just grab it. Everybody's an ATD person. So you just grab it from there.
Even better. And I can agree with you on both of those absolute must-haves for your own bookshelf. And I love that they were right within arm's reach for you. So
I know.
great.
Like, people are like, how do you do that? I'm like, I'm literally surrounded by books. The only clean part of this office is what you can see in the video.
My office is the same. No, it's the same. I have books piled everywhere, and I read them all the time. So right there with you on that.
My friend says you nest around you. But,
I think that's a wonderful way to live.
Here's one called The Bones. This is about dice for books, but dice for games.
Oh my gosh!
So anyway, so that's probably my 6th.
A bonus 3rd book. I love that. Oh, I'm glad we had that question for you. That was great. All right. Next question for you. What is one tool that you cannot live without? Yeah,
that's a great question. So I think the tool that I use more often than not is PowerPoint. I definitely am doing everything in PowerPoint. And if you haven't checked out the PowerPoint AI capabilities, just amazing, right? You designer slides, making backgrounds disappear, all that kind of stuff. And then I'm going to go above and beyond. So one more piece of software. I am co-founder of a company called Enterprise Game Stack, and we've created digital card games and multiplayer and single player card games. And we wanted to kind of gamify some instruction without, and this is the thing. So a lot of people say, well, gamification, the cute little characters and all that kind of stuff. My company will never go for that. Cards have a more serious game vibe to them.
Yes,
and so we've had large companies really kind of embrace using digital cards. Are totally customizable. But so I can't live without that because I sleep, eat, sleep, and drink thinking about that platform for good, bad, and ugly. And I'm not a programmer, so every time it goes wrong, I'm like, I got to call the programmer. I got to So anyway, I can't. It's a love-hate, but PowerPoint and Enterprise Game Stack are the 2 tools that I can't live without.
Well, one tool that I love and one tool I can't wait to learn more about. So thank you for that.
Great.
Yeah, we love above and beyond here.
Awesome.
Last question for you today. Mm-hmm. What is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
So this is interesting. So it's not like a personal piece of advice, like somebody sitting down and say, hey, Karl, this. But when I first started my career, I was really into Tom Peters and read all kinds of things about Tom Peters. And he had a quote in one of his books by Mario Andretti that said, if everything seems under control, you're not going fast enough. And I just thought that was like, what a great piece of advice. Because like, I always feel like everything is out of control. Like, I'm trying to do this and I can't control the software and, et cetera, et cetera. But he told me basically that that's okay, right? You don't have to be in control. You can just kind of ride along and see what happens. And so I thought that was a great piece of advice.
Sometimes you hear something in the moment that you absolutely need it. And I feel like what you just said is what I needed to hear because I'm sure most of us are in the midst of times where there's just a lot happening. Most of it probably very, very good, but there's still those moments where you think, oh my gosh, I have nothing under control. Everything is spiraling. All of this feels hard. No, maybe it's that it should occasionally feel that way because it reminds you that you are moving.
Exactly.
You're moving fast enough, perhaps.
Right. You're making things happen. You could stop and go in the pit stop, but like nothing, you don't want to race in the pit stop. So
no, races are not won over there.
Right.
Oh my gosh. I love that advice. I am going to remember that for a very long time. That was fantastic. Karl, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing so much about not just where gamification is and where it has been, but where it's going with all of us today.
Yeah, thanks. This has been my pleasure, and best of luck to everybody around the world. And thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you. Yes. And of course, many thanks to all of you in our community for listening or watching with us today. And before you go, we have a message from our producer, Halyna Hodges.
Our chapter has so much to offer. Go to dcatt.org and choose our community to learn more about our communities of practice, ZCPTD study groups, and peer coaching opportunities.
Check out dcatd.org for upcoming chapter events, learning programs, member benefits, and so much more.